Yesterday morning, I was reading an article, and the editor was kind of tarring and feathering this political figure. And they used these words, and I thought it was just picture perfect for what we deal with here, and probably what all of you are dealing with. And they used the term grief illiteracy. And I think in many ways, we, the unfaithful spouse, can become very illiterate in terms of grief. You know, illiteracy is being unable to read or write. It's basically being unable to understand what's going on. And the unfaithful is very illiterate. We're grief illiterate in many ways, especially on the front end. We just can't understand what you, the betrayed, are going through. We just kind of get lost in translation, and we're unable to understand what you're dealing with. And then to add insult to injury, what you're dealing with is specifically because of what we have done. So when you're trying to become literate, if you're trying to understand what's going on, the frustration for the unfaithful is, how do you empathize if you can't understand? How do you become a safe person if you can't understand? How do you kind of woo them back if you don't understand what the betrayed is dealing with, specifically because of what you've done, and maybe because of what you've done a few different times? So it can be incredibly challenging, but here's some things that worked for me. I'll tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, early on, I was incredibly grief illiterate. I didn't have a clue what Samantha was facing, and I was hurrying her, I was bullying her, I was telling her to get over it, all while I was unaware that I was doing it. It wasn't until Rick sat me down and helped teach me a few things that I realized it. So one of the things that you can start to do is really attentively listen. When you're listening, you're not just waiting for a break in the conversation to talk. I used to do that. I was listening, but I was trained in debate and wanted to be an attorney and majored in debate and all of that in college. And so at some level, all I was doing was waiting for a gap to speak. Another thing that you can do is you can seek to understand what they're saying and not have an answer for everything, and not try and defend yourself, and not try and correct their thinking, like we talked about last time, but just try and understand what they're getting at. Something that worked for me also was I would restate what Samantha had said or yelled or screamed at me. And I wouldn't do it condescending. I wouldn't do it in an attacking, defending way. I would just say, so if I understand what you're saying, you're trying to help me understand that sexual intimacy is hard for you because you're bombarded with reminders and triggers, and so you're not rejecting me sexually, you're kind of rejecting the experience that you go through every time we're going to try and engage in physical intimacy. Is that a better understanding? And she looked at me and was like, exactly right. Another thing to do is to take notes. Now, for you that are involved in business out there, if you were involved in a transaction or you were trying to close a deal, you take notes. You want to know what your client wants. You want to know a date to get it done. You want to know what's specific to the contract. I mean, if there's money to be made, and a lot of money in some contracts, you're going to take notes. I would tell you, as a unfaithful, listening to your betrayed spouse tell you what they need or what they're feeling, I would actually write some notes down. And they'll go, what are you doing? I'd say, I want to remember this, and I want to think about this, and write some notes. And finally, one of the things that really worked well for me is our communication oftentimes was tough. But as I listened and tried to understand and restated some things and took some notes, I would then write letters to Samantha before I left for work. Sometimes on the weekend when I would go be with the kids for several hours, I would write a letter that would say something like, I've been thinking and really understanding some things, and I want you to know that I just am so incredibly sorry, because I know that when I have done this, you have felt that, or when I have said this, you have felt that, and that's terrible, and I don't want you to feel that way, and I don't want you to have this going on, but I know that you do, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try and see our marriage be healed and to see you be healed. I was just better in letters for a season. It was just safer. It was more palatable to Samantha. And I hope it helps you. I hope that you'll continue to become literate in grief and not remain stuck in grief illiteracy like I was for so long.